it is certainly possible that someone who had contact with this individual, a family member or other individual, could develop Ebola in the coming weeks. But there is no doubt in my mind that we will stop it here.
That was CDC Director Tom Frieden. The deadly Ebola virus has arrived in the U.S. and authorities believe a handful of people may have been exposed. We'll have that and more right here, right now on the News Hub. Good morning and welcome. I'm Simon Constable. And for more coverage on the Ebola situation, we have Atlanta Bureau Chief Betsy McKay on the set with us. She heads up coverage for the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, which is always a mouthful to say. Thank you for being here. We normally got you remotely. It's great to be here. Tell us the latest.
Well, the latest is that the first, what health officials have been saying would happen has happened. The first case of Ebola has been diagnosed in the U.S. So that means, we've already seen some Ebola patients in the U.S., but they were brought here. This is someone who got sick when he was here and potentially exposed others, and that's why it's very frightening. It
is very frightening, and people get very frightened with this, and there may not be a need to, and we'll get to that in a moment. The timeline is September the 19th, he departs Liberia, which is where we've been hearing about the disease has been running rampant, basically, and then he goes through this. Take us through the rest of it. Arrives in the U.S.
Sure. He left Liberia on September 19th, as you said, flew to the U.S. Authorities are not disclosing the flight he came on or flights, so they say that's not a risk. He arrived in the U.S. on the 20th. And then 4 days later developed symptoms of some vague symptoms. Ebola's initial symptoms are maybe fever, maybe not feeling so great. He went to the hospital on the 26th, 2 days later, to an emergency room and was not diagnosed. They said his symptoms were nondescript and sent him away. He came back 2 days later, which was now Sunday, this past Sunday, in an ambulance and was admitted.
Wasn't the fact that he come in from Liberia a bit of a clue? I mean, we know we've been hearing about it in the news. Maybe that's a question for another time to them. So this is the first person. It was inevitable it was going to happen. You said that. He is now in quarantine, right? Quarantine and isolation.
Yes, he's in an isolation unit in a hospital in Dallas. He can't go anywhere. He can't infect anyone further. The question now is, who was he in contact with? The CDC says that was more like a handful of people than hundreds or thousands. But they need to go now monitor all those people for 21 days. And they say it's possible that some were infected enough to get sick.
So it's 21 days is the incubation period. That's why it's up to 21 days.
Right.
What about drugs that can prevent this? Are we learning more about that now? I mean, is that being put into high gear?
It is being put into high gear. This has all happened so fast. These are just experimental drugs. The first one, the most well-known one that was used, has now run out. There's no more of that, but there is another one from a Canadian company. All of these drugs, vaccines, are now in trial. I mean, everything's being fast-tracked, but you can't do it fast enough to get enough to, to tamp down this outbreak.
And that is the worry, I think, a lot of people, when they hear Ebola, they get very frightened. Should they be frightened? Should people be thinking, oh my goodness, this is terrible, I'm never going to go out of my house again? I think what I'm hearing is no, you don't need to be terrified.
No, it's a horrible, scary disease, but it's actually not easy to contract. It's not like the measles, where if you have the measles and I don't, just my sitting here will infect me. This is a disease.
And that is true. Measles is very infectious, right? If one of us did have it, the other one would probably have it by the end of the interview, or at least the big chance of that. Not so with Ebola.
Right. Thankfully, both you and I are vaccinated. There's no vaccine for Ebola, but Ebola is spread not through the air, but through bodily fluids. You have to touch, and the people who get sick from Ebola patients are people who are caring for them generally, either family members or health workers. So you have to come in contact with their bodily fluids.
Okay, thank you very much, Betsy McKay from the Atlanta Bureau, heading up study of the CDC coverage of what's going on with Ebola. Thank you very much.